Okay, this is chapter 67 of The Night Singer. 67. There was a bus shelter to the right of the road, and Eric realized that it must be where Joel had taken the picture of himself. It was empty, and the afternoon sun was shining so brightly through the windshield that he could almost imagine it was summer. Eric pictured a bruised, beaten Joel in front of him, sitting there alone in the middle of the night, taking stock of his wounds, mustering enough strength to make it home. Eric eased his foot off the accelerator, past the bus shelter, and turned off towards Farston. He adjusted the sun visor and glanced over at Hannah, who was staring out of the passenger side window. However much she tried to pretend otherwise, it was obvious that the case was getting to her. "I'm fine," she said. Hannah seemed to have a sixth sense for other people's moods. "Understood," he replied. His phone started ringing, and Eric quickly checked the screen. It was Yadu. "Shit," he muttered. "It's my father-in-law. He never normally calls just to talk." "Want me to answer?" Eric shook his head. It was probably nothing. Sophia was likely in with a patient and couldn't answer their calls. No matter how much she moaned about her parents, she would never ignore them. "Do you think there's a risk Ulrika will warn Gabriel?" Hannah asked. "Honestly, I don't know." "Me neither. But let's call the school and check whether he's there anyway." Hannah made the call, giving him a thumbs up as soon as she had confirmation. Eric could only hear Hannah's side of the conversation, but he managed to glean that Gabriel was currently in a class. Without mentioning that what they wanted to talk to Gabriel about, Hannah told the person on the other end of the line not to interrupt his class, but to be waiting outside when they arrived. They were 10 minutes away, she said. "Jesus, that woman at the principal's office was so stressed," Hannah said once she had hung up. "That's not so surprising, is it?" "No, I know. She asked whether one of his relatives had died." "Maybe she's who he was having an affair with," Hannah replied with a simple shake of her head. A tractor pulled out from a track to one side of the road, and Eric braked hard. He swung out into the other lane to try to pass it, just as a line of cars appeared in the other direction, and the tractor pointed on like it had all the time in the world. "Welcome to the countryside," said Hannah. "Right," Eric replied, smiling. He drummed on the steering wheel until an opportunity to overtake the tractor appeared. He could have simply used his siren to speed things up, but a minute here or there was hardly going to make much difference. It wasn't like Gabriel Anderson knew they were on their way. Yadu called again, but Eric ignored him and repressed the flicker of anxiety he felt. Whatever had happened, he couldn't call him back right now. They were almost at the school. A woman was waiting for them outside the modern glass building. She was in her 30s, wearing a short-sleeved green blouse and a pair of jeans she kept rubbing her palms against. Eric pulled up right beside the main doors. "Why do you need to talk to Gabriel?" she asked the minute they climbed out of the car. "We can't say," said Eric, "but we need him to come with us, so it would be great if you or another member of the staff could take over his class." "I can do it. I'm Sandra Dahl, by the way." She shook hands with each of them. It struck Eric that perhaps they should ask Sandra to get Gabriel from his class. There was a risk he might panic if he knew they were police, but that wasn't a responsibility they could place on her, particularly not considering how nervous she seemed. Gabriel would know something was wrong. Another option was to wait until the class was over, but then the corridors would be full of students. Right now, they were almost deserted. The woman led them over to a classroom and nodded toward the door, taking a step back. Eric knocked and opened the door. "Hi, Gabriel. I don't know if you remember me, but my name is Eric Lindgren. I need you to come with us, please." Gabriel looked like a rabbit caught in headlights. He didn't speak, simply stared straight at them. Eric had talked with him during the first day of the investigation, right after they had broken the news to Rebecca. Should he have suspected something then? There was no point dwelling on questions like that, nor on the fact that he should have asked to see the images from the rest area rather than simply accepting that Hannah said about them going over to Rebecca's to show them to her. If he had, he would have been able to identify Gabriel right there and then, and they could have avoided going to see Rebecca at all. "Don't worry about your class," said Eric. "Sandra will take it over." Gabriel seemed to jump at the mention of Sandra's name. He looked, if possible, even more stressed than he had earlier. Perhaps Eric had stumbled upon the truth when he suggested that she was the one Gabriel was having an affair with. Though the room was full of teenagers, it was completely silent. Gabriel turned to look at his students, then toward the window. He had a pen in one hand, and the board behind him was covered in equations. Eric stood perfectly still, watching Gabriel, ready to launch himself at him if necessary. From where he was standing, all he could see through the window was the bright blue sky. Gabriel slowly turned back toward his students and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, he opened them, turned toward the door, and began walking.